Okay, here's a weird one for you. What could a 4.5 billion-year-old rock possibly have to do with your lunch? And what could either of those have to do with the literal end of the universe? Well, today, we're going to connect those dots. We're diving into the idea of human impact, but on these massively different scales of time. We're talking about an accidental discovery that ended up saving millions of lives, and then an invention that, well, both feeds and threatens our entire world. It all leads to this huge question. What kind of legacy are we actually leaving behind?
So, what's the answer to that riddle? It's us. It's human impact. Each one of those seemingly random things, dating the Earth, feeding the world, the end of everything, is really just another chapter in the story of the mark we leave. And as you'll see, that mark can be totally accidental, absolutely world-changing, and in the grand scheme of things, maybe not so permanent after all.
So let's start small. Our story begins with just one scientist, laser-focused on a very specific mission. And I gotta tell you, he wasn't setting out to save the world or anything like that. He was basically a detective, trying to solve one of the oldest cold cases you can imagine.
All right, let's meet our accidental detective. His name was Claire Patterson, a geochemist over at Caltech. Now his field, geochemistry, is all about studying the chemical makeup of planets. Think of it like planetary scale forensics. He could read these tiny chemical fingerprints left behind by cosmic events. And Patterson, he was an absolute master at measuring impossibly small amounts of stuff.
So here's what he was trying to do. Patterson had this brilliant idea. He figured, hey, meteorites are basically pristine leftovers from when our solar system was born, right? So if he could measure how much of the uranium inside them had decayed into lead over time, he could use that like a stopwatch to figure out the exact age of the Earth. A fantastic plan, but it ended up taking him on a wild detour he never, ever saw coming.
And you know what? He nailed it. In 1956, he announced the definitive age of the Earth, 4.55 billion years old. I mean, what a huge achievement. But as he kept trying to fine-tune his work, he ran into this bizarre problem. He just kept hitting a wall. Something was constantly contaminating his super-sensitive experiments, and he couldn't figure out what it was.
It turns out his equipment was almost too good. It was so precise that it was picking up tiny amounts of lead contamination from everywhere. It was in the lab, in the chemicals he was using. It was literally in the air. To get a clean reading, he had to build one of the world's first ever ultra-clean rooms. And that really frustrating detour forced him to ask a brand new, and frankly, a much more terrifying question. Where in the world is all this lead coming from?
Now, you got to understand, back then, the prevailing belief, what all the public health officials and industry folks were saying, was that the lead in our environment was, mostly natural and basically harmless. But Patterson's incredibly careful research, which, remember, only happened because he was trying to date a rock, well, it told a completely different and way more alarming story.
The scale of what he found was just staggering. He figured out that the average person walking around had a lead burden in their body that was 100 times higher than our ancestors before the Industrial Revolution. 100 times! This wasn't natural. This was a recent, man-made poison flooding our entire environment.
And he found the main culprit, something called tetraethyl lead. It was an additive in gasoline, and it was being pumped out of the tailpipe of every single car on the road. In 1965, he published his findings, and his paper included this absolutely chilling line. He had stumbled his way into uncovering a massive global public health crisis. And he didn't just publish the paper and walk away. Oh no. For the rest of his life, he fought a brutal battle against powerful industries and government bureaucracy to get the lead out of our lives. His relentless work directly paved the way for the Clean Air Act and, eventually, the complete ban of leaded gasoline in the U.S. Think about that. One scientist who just wanted to know how old the Earth was ended up protecting the health of billions of people.
So Patterson's story is incredible, right? It shows the massive, unexpected impact just one person can have. Now let's zoom out a bit. Let's go from the impact of a single person to the impact of a single invention. We're going to talk about a chemical formula that, in a weird way, gave life to billions of people, while at the exact same time, it was fueling death on a truly industrial scale. Okay, so back in the early 1900s, two scientists, Fritz Haber and Carl Bosch, they cracked one of nature's biggest puzzles. See, our atmosphere is almost 80% nitrogen, but plants can't use it in that form. It's like being surrounded by food you can't eat. What Haber and Bosch did was figure out how to pull that nitrogen right out of thin air and turn it into ammonia, something we could use. This was, and I mean this literally, a world-changing discovery.
But this formula is the ultimate double-edged sword. It's a total paradox.
On one side, you have life. The ammonia they made became the key ingredient for synthetic fertilizer, which allowed us to feed a booming global population. But on the other side, you have death. That exact same ammonia was the raw material for making modern explosives. It literally fueled the industrial-scale slaughter of the world wars.
I mean, just look at these numbers. Before this process really got going around 1910, the world population was about 1.75 billion. Today, we're soaring past 8 billion. The Haber-Bosch process basically shattered the natural limits on how much food we could grow. It's what made the insane population boom of the last century possible. In fact, some people estimate that about half the people alive on Earth right now, half, are here because of this one chemical reaction.
But just like we saw with leaded gasoline, there was this whole cascade of unintended consequences. This miracle formula had a dark side. Pumping all this extra nitrogen into the environment has led to massive water and air pollution, it's messed with greenhouse gas levels, and it's a huge driver of biodiversity loss. These are problems we're still very much trying to figure out today.
Okay, so we've seen the impact of one person, and we've seen the impact of one invention. Now, I want you to get ready to zoom out. I mean, way out. Let's ask a bigger question. What happens to all our stuff? Our biggest achievements, our entire civilization, when you start thinking not in years or centuries, but in geological time.
It turns out even our most impressive accomplishments are incredibly fragile. You know Niagara Falls? Gone in 50,000 years, just eroded away. Mount Rushmore? Give it 1,000,000 years, and it's just a regular, boring cliff again. Even the Great Pyramids, maybe the most durable things we've ever built, will be nothing but unrecognizable mounds of rock in about 7 million years. Everything just fades.
And honestly, that's just the start. That's just the local forecast. Now we're going to push the timeline out even further. Forget millions of years. Let's talk billions and then trillions to see the final act. Not just for us, but for our entire planet and eventually for the universe itself. So in about 1 billion years, our sun starts to get hotter. Hot enough to literally boil our oceans away, turning Earth into a sterile rock. Fast forward another 6.5 billion years, and the sun will swell up into a massive red giant. And when it does, it's pretty much guaranteed to swallow and completely destroy our planet. Just gone. The universe itself keeps chugging along, but it starts getting very quiet. After 1 trillion years, galaxies just run out of fuel. Star formation stops. 100 trillion years later, the very last stars, the tiny red dwarfs, finally flicker out and die. The lights go out across the cosmos. All that's left are stellar corpses and black holes. And then, after an amount of time so long it basically breaks your brain to think about, even the black holes themselves will evaporate into nothingness, just empty.
Wow, okay. So, after that little trip through time, from one determined scientist in a lab to the end of everything, what does it all mean? Let's try to put a bow on this.
So you have Claire Patterson's battle against lead poisoning, which is this amazing example of how one person with real integrity can have a positive impact that lasts for generations. Then you have the Haber-Bosch process, showing how our brilliant ideas can have these massive, world-altering consequences, both for good and for ill. And then you have the cosmic timeline, which reminds us that, in the end, all of it, every last bit, gets erased.
And that leaves us with a pretty deep question, doesn't it? If every single thing we build is doomed to crumble, and our own planet is going to be destroyed, does any of our impact even matter? Is it all just meaningless? Or does the fact that our time here is so incredibly short make the impact we have on each other, right here, right now, the only thing that truly matters at all? That's something to chew on. Thanks for joining me.